Howdy again, everybody. This is Doc with ThoroFan, and we're just about a week or so removed from the Pegasus World Cup Day program down at Gulfstream Park, one of the first big racing days of the year for 2025, and certainly were some great races. Great to see White Barrio regain that form that we've all kind of come to know him by, and hopefully he'll go on to do some great things in what is probably going to be a very stacked older horse handicap division this year, which is something we probably have not been able to say for quite some time. However, kind of overshadowing the day itself was all of this talk about potential decoupling legislation in Florida, and that led on the NBC telecast to an interview with first CEO Belinda Stronach when she was kind of asked about the future of Florida racing, and specifically she kind of made this comment, I think, which caught a lot of us by surprise.
In the best interest of racing in Florida, I mean, the fact is that Gulfstream Park is now in a very dense urban setting, and that's not great for horses, ultimately.
So when a lot of people, I'm sure, heard that, and at least it did trigger some stuff in my mind, it was like, well, that's kind of an interesting argument. I've never really heard it raised too much, and if you think about it, a lot of the big racetracks out there nowadays are in more built-up urban environments. And if you look at some of the things that are being rebuilt, Belmont Park is being rebuilt in, a heavy suburban, you could argue maybe a little bit of an urban environment. Pimlico is about to be rebuilt in a very urban environment with a lot of build-up around it. So this issue of it not being the best for the horses, I don't really know exactly if that's true or not. And some people might be thinking, well, think about carriage horses that are in New York City or Philadelphia, someplace like that, where they're right in those environments. They're exposed to the cars, the fumes, the exhaust fumes, all the other hazards that potentially come, dealing with the city. But that's not really the same thing, I don't think. But again, I'm a small animal veterinarian, focusing on that realm of the profession, and just a very, very passionate fan of horse racing. So I wanted to go to somebody who had a lot more experience and expertise in this sort of thing than I do. And that, of course, is a good friend of mine and somebody who we've talked to on ThoroFan before, and that is Dr. Kathryn Papp, who has done racetrack medicine and is an equine sports medicine specialist. And in addition, her family actually does breed a small amount of horses and races them. And currently they are racing down in the area of Tampa Bay Downs and Gulfstream Park. So I figured, who better to ask about this particular issue than Dr. Kathryn Papp? So we're going to show you that conversation right now. We did have some issues video-wise with things, so it's really just going to be the audio of us talking back and forth. But I hope this kind of helps answer some of those questions. It definitely did for me. So let's talk with Dr. Kate Papp as we kind of delve a little bit deeper into this idea of thoroughbreds in an urban environment.
We are thrilled to be joined by Dr. Kathryn Papp, who is a very well-known equine veterinarian, especially in the racing world and in racing circles, and has done a lot of work improving the welfare for animals at racetracks, especially horses, and on the forefront of really pushing for proper welfare changes. And her family also does own a small racing stable and does race actually down in Florida at a lot of the tracks. So we figured she would be one of the people to definitely talk to about some of the statements that were made by Belinda Stronach, and as to why Gulfstream may not always be feasible for racing, especially in the future. So thank you, Dr. Papp, for joining us today. We are really appreciative.
Well, thank you for having me. Hopefully, I can give you some information that helps people get a better understanding of what's going on.
Sure. So, I think people that kind of saw that NBC interview with her, and kind of some of the statements she made, she kind of basically started by just kind of saying, that the real increase in urban growth around Gulfstream Park and the casino building and everything there, that type of environment is not really the best for the horses as far as racing or stabling. At least that was kind of the theme I think we were getting from her when she was stating that. So what would be some of the concerns, if they are legitimate, of horses kind of being raced in that type of urban environment with a lot of urban sprawl around, and are there concerns, for horses in that kind of environment?
Well, that it's not an unfounded concern. However, with the US racing industry, the way it was set up from long time ago up until it's grown and shrunk until now, it's always been based kind of in an urban environment situation. So Gulfstream Park absolutely used to have a lot less going on near and around the racetrack in Hallandale Beach than it does now, with the shopping, some of the other amenities that draw people to that area. But as far as the backside of the racetrack is concerned, it's really not affected much by where the stabling is, and the horses themselves are not changed in the way that they're cared for by the location, not now versus at least 10 years ago. So there was Calder before, which got incorporated into Gulfstream, and there's Palm Meadows, which is not far away. Payson Park and Palm Beach Downs are those training centers where a lot of those horses train, in also in urban environments. However, most racetracks in the US are even more so in urban environments. Think about Pimlico in Baltimore. Almost all of the racetracks and the racehorses are kept in stalls and in barns that do not exit the immediate location except for to go out training, maybe for a little roll in the sand pit or something like that. And then they get walked inside the barns, maybe a little grazing and back in their stalls. So maybe if you want to talk about urban environments as far as air quality, traffic, things like that, you could make an argument here or there, but none of it changes how we keep our horses, and that's how we keep our horses in racing, whether they're in an urban or rural area, actually. So if they've even shown the air quality in Hallandale Beach has improved since the 80s. So as far as whatever is affecting the horses, it's more to do with how we keep racehorses that are actively racing and in training at all racetracks in the US, not just in particular Gulfstream. I mean, almost every racetrack currently is in a urban or becoming urban area.
Yeah, and I guess for some people that may not be as follow racing as much, or to the casual fan that might hear something like that, they may try to put a connection together if they're thinking, oh, it's sort of the same type of conditions that people are worried about with carriage horses in New York City or Philadelphia or somewhere like that, where they're literally kind of right on top of everything and working and walking around and doing sort of those things in an environment where they're basically right next to cars or trucks, and where potential air quality would be a concern, as well as other potential health hazards to the horses. That's really not the same type of thing that's going on when we're talking about racetracks in urban environments, right?
Correct, not at all. In fact, the biggest things you'd be maybe concerned about would be traffic for people vanning horses off or onto the property of the racetrack, getting themselves there to care for the horses. But as far as the horses' living conditions, where they are and how the racetrack is designed is not any different in this environment versus what they could change with the property that they have as the way it is now or the way it was 10 years ago. There's absolutely no change for the horses' welfare. They're not in any closer proximity to other horses, they're not more overcrowded or undercrowded than they were. In fact, there's a lot less horses per race these days. So if anything, they probably have more space, less horses, less population density, less exposure to incoming horses and diseases, things like that, than they did previously. So, as far as the urban environment, it affects, if you want to say anyone, it would be the caretakers and the humans associated with racing, not the horses.
Okay, yeah, no, and I think that's really important for a lot of people to understand. If, let's say, if you were comparing a racetrack like Gulfstream or Pimlico, or even what'll be the new Belmont Park, something like that, um, to, let's say, a racetrack that was maybe more out in an area like a Payson Park, which I know is not that far away, or is in a more of a rural type of environment, would there be any benefits? Assuming the horses are housed the same, and we'll talk about that in a second. But just if you took like the same kind of blueprint and you had a racetrack like Gulfstream in that urban environment, and then a racetrack that was more in a rural area, would there be any difference as far as the quality of health for the horses in those environments?
No, for the most part, not, if anything, negligible, but for the most part, there'd be zero. In fact, Bowie Park, was open for a long time, and that was in a fairly rural area. There were other racetracks that were in more rural areas that have closed over time, and the urban environments are the ones that actually have survived more than anything because of the casino additions and the subsidies. But when you ask about something like Payson Park or Palm Beach Downs, the fact that they are actually, Palm Meadows isn't even just as much of a urban area when it comes to the sprawl of what Palm Beach County. So, but the difference there is that it's a training center, so the property is set up differently and the horses are housed differently. But if they were housed and had the same amenities or lack of amenities as they do at the majority of the racetracks, it wouldn't change whether they were inside a gated community, which is basically what a racetrack or training center is. Um, it would not, inside that gated community, it wouldn't change the uh, lifestyle or situation for the horses, whether the outside of that gate is an urban environment or a rural one.
Okay. And as we kind of mentioned, at the beginning, your family owns and breeds a very small stable and stuff like that. And you guys have raced, both at Tampa Bay, Gulfstream, down there. Do you, with your own horses or the horses that your family runs, do you guys have any concerns about running it at Gulfstream as far as some of the concerns that were raised? I know you ship in most likely, like your horses are not stabled at Gulfstream, but even with shipping in and things like that, are there concerns that you have where it would not be the best environment for them to race in?
Actually, we were talking about this, and the trainer and my family and I were all talking about this the other day. And actually, we prefer to race at Gulfstream in general versus Tampa Bay when they're both running. Sometimes because the gate crew or the better racing, as far as the competitors that you're racing against, the surfaces that you're racing on, depending on the time of year. Sometimes we would prefer to race at Gulfstream versus a lesser urban area such as Tampa Bay Downs. And yes, it's a pain to drive the 5 hours. I think the horses leave around 2 in the morning to get there to the receiving barn. But once you get there, there's absolutely no difference in, like I said, the fact that that's an urban track, if you would want to call it that, versus going to Tampa Bay Downs, which is not as urban of an area. Once the horses get in there, they don't know the differences. The stalls are the same size, the getting around the racetrack's the same. Um, and even our colleagues and friends that are trainers that are stalled there 24/7 have not ever made any complaints, claims of problems or issues with the fact of the environment of where the racetrack is located or how it's affected by its location. So that it is not a concern for most horsemen and women, and nor has it been a concern of ours either.
Okay, and then kind of the final question, looking more, and I think some people maybe who are more casual fans or just members of the public hearing this and kind of the debate that's going on, one thing they would obviously associate an urban environment more with would be a lot more loud noises, cars honking, things like that. So would that, if we talk more of kind of like maybe a horse that is more prone to anxiety issues, for lack of a better word, or something like that, or that may be more spooked or not as settled in certain environments, would that be something that you would be concerned with as far as racing in, let's say, at a Gulfstream in an urban environment with that noise constantly being around versus kind of like a more rural or suburban type of location?
No, not really, especially because the way today's thoroughbred racehorse is raised in general. So if you're breeding to race, then you're raising them and desensitizing them. They're presented with so many things and put in so many uh, new situations by time they're a year, 2, 3 years old, that whatever they're going to encounter at the racetrack is going to most likely be mild in comparison. That's why you see these horses that are only 3 years old pretty much handling the crowds, the noises, the bugles, all of the horns and the bells. And when they have the Budweiser, horses and the emu races, all of those
Mm,
horses seem to help, take that very well for the most part, especially on these busy days at the racetrack, such as Pegasus Day and the Derby days and Triple Crown days, Breeders' Cup, all of that. Most of these horses are only 3 years old, some younger, and they tend to handle these things very well and do not seem to be affected. In fact, I think the backyard horses for people in rural areas, especially here in Florida, where fireworks are being set off by your neighbor more closely and frequently, and the lightning storms that we get are more likely to be a cause of concern, frightening of the animals than anything, and they're more likely to respond to those influences than racehorses actively living on a racetrack would be. They almost have a sense of comfort in their barns and stalls where they're secluded and together versus just being out in a paddock and left to fend for themselves and not know where the sounds are coming from, what's going on. And the horses at these racetracks have been exposed to a lot more by time they hear any loud noises. It's pretty much not of any care to them. There's always an exception because some
yeah,
horses
yeah.
are always going to be more sensitive than others, but we have ways of dealing with that. And like I said, whether it's your backyard horse, your competitive show horse, or a racehorse, whether we put cotton in their ears to decrease sound sensitivity, whether we give them anti-anxiety medications, things like that. For the ones that are more sensitive, but in general, our thoroughbreds handle a lot, and that's one of the things that they're actually revered for is how brave and unflappable they are in many situations.
No, so that's all really good, advice and information too. I think that kind of covers everything that people might have questions about or anything like that. Is there anything else that maybe I haven't brought up, or that kind of is in your mind when this topic was broached and kind of that comment was made that you would think the member of the public or the average fan would need to know about this type of debate?
I would just say that the way versus they call them yards in most other abroad countries where
Mhm.
they train horses, so Ireland, Australia, the UK, and not every yard, but most yards, they're training and also having in very rural areas, they're having a lot more land where the horses can have experiences outside their stalls and they're not crammed into as much of, like I talked about, the gated community. So they have the ability to turn out into pens and just run loose for a little while, just get out some extra energy. They have longer places to go graze. They have some grass growing out there that will be able for them to graze and act like their normal natural behavior and give them some breaks. And they have a lot of farms in those areas and training centers where they can what they call spell the horses, which should be giving them a little bit of time off here and there from the anxiety of a bustling racetrack environment. And that is the one thing that we don't do here in general, whether you're in an urban or rural area. Our racetracks are not designed to offer those amenities to our racehorses. That's why we have such training centers like Fair Hill in Maryland, Payson Park and Palm Beach Downs and Palm Meadows in Florida, and others around the country, so that these horses don't have to live in the horsey equivalent of a urban environment and in close quarters with other horses that they're cooped up basically. So that costs more money though, and it also
Mhm.
is sometimes more difficult for the horses to get the experience of what racing's truly like. So that we would have to change our entire methodology of stabling racehorses and how we build racetracks and the housing for the horses here in the US if we wanted to actually truly make a difference in the quality of the horses' daily uh, care and ability to have more natural behaviors in a more natural, relaxed, rural type environment.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's a whole different debate, but it's certainly something I think that's brought up quite a bit, and certainly would be a topic for future discussion to see if maybe in the future the U.S. and North America could move potentially a little bit more towards that model. But as I said, that's kind of a topic for another day. And thank you so much, Dr. Papp, for coming on with us at ThoroFan and giving your most expert opinion on this. We really appreciate it. And hopefully, if we have any other questions that pop up from our members or other fans, we'll be able to come back and chat a little more about it.
Absolutely, not a problem. Thank you very much for having me. Hope it helped.
So I hope that helps answer a lot of the questions that people may have had. It certainly answered a lot of the questions I had about it after hearing that comment, as I really wasn't sure if that really was a major issue that needed to be kind of considered, especially with the new racetracks that are being built or rebuilt these days and are going to be coming online in the next couple of years. ThoroFan is incredibly grateful for Dr. Papp to take that time out of her day. She is a very busy veterinarian to talk with us and answer those questions. And if anything she said or other questions maybe popped into your head as a result of things that she said regarding this, certainly drop a line in the comments. Let us know what they are, and we'll certainly circle back with her and see if she can answer those as well. It was also very interesting how kind of at the end of the interview we talked on or touched on another topic that we're probably going to delve a little bit more deeper into this year at ThoroFan, which is the general housing of thoroughbreds at racetracks in overall, as compared to the way they are kind of housed and trained over in Europe or other major training centers, where maybe they have a little more open space and they're not confined to a stall all the time. But that, of course, is a topic for another day and doesn't really, as she kind of pointed out, equate to what we were talking about with this urban sprawl concern as far as all of that goes. So look for that coming out in the future as we talk to some more experts on that. But until that time, I am Doc for ThoroFan. And as always, if you, the racing fan, are looking for the most accurate and up-to-date information about this wonderful sport of thoroughbred racing, put out mostly by us, the racing fans, there's only one place you need to turn, and that's right here at ThoroFan.